If you listen to this podcast, then you have definitely heard me say that every podcast solves a problem. But inevitably, I get pushback on that from people sometimes where they say, well, Courtney, my show is just meant to be fun. Or this is just meant to bring people together who love this topic. And that is why I invited fellow podcast host and wine educator Kristi Mayfield to join me for this episode. Because once upon a time, she thought the same thing, that her podcast was a just for fun podcast about wine and that it wasn't all that serious. But then she realized that her show wasn't doing its job of driving traffic to her business, no matter how much time, energy, and effort that she put in. And so she finally slowed down, did the hard work of identifying what problems her podcast solved, and learned how to communicate those to her listeners. And that is what turned her Just for Fun wine podcast into a top 100 show that people can't stop listening to. And in this episode, we're going to show you how to do the same. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Kristi, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And I want to dig into all the stuff that you have worked so hard on with your podcast and the results that you're getting and all of those things. But before we do, just for context, tell us a little bit about who you are and what your show's about.
My name is Kristi Mayfield. I am a wine educator, and my passion is really taking wine from something that has somehow become so aloof, and sometimes people call it pretentious. I don't really like that word, but bringing it back to just fun. It's about conversations. It's about bringing people together. It shouldn't be scary, fearful, or complex, but we've made it that way. So the intent of my podcast is really to allow people a vehicle, a source, a guide, if you will, to just break down wine into things that make sense. And so you understand what's going on in your glass.
I love this. And when our paths crossed, I was so excited because I was like, and you're right, because so many of the wine podcasts and things are very, I'll say snooty and, it's fine. But also you just brought such a refreshing take to this topic as it's traditionally kind of seen and shared in whatever space that might be. You think Wine Spectator magazine and things like that, right? And other types of podcasts that are covering a similar topic, but you bring such a fresh take to the table. No pun intended. And I know that your listeners appreciate that. When we were working through like your podcast description and stuff, it's like literally this scene of standing in the aisle at the grocery store being like, I have no idea what to grab off the shelf. I don't know. Should I buy the expensive bottles? Should I not? And truly the before and after of your podcast has been so amazing to see. So that's what I want to unpack with you next. Can you take us back prior to our paths crossing? Because you had a podcast previously. And I'd love to just know what were some of the challenges you were experiencing with that show that led you to rebrand the podcast in the first place?
So I did. I had a really fun podcast with my co-host, Charisse, great friend, fantastic, fun person. And we really just decided that we did have a different voice. She's kind of the street smarts guru and I'm the nerdy one. And so bringing that together was one of our goals. And so we did have a lot of fun bringing guest winemakers and others on the show. But at the end of the day, when I launched my wine education business, Wine Wise, I realized that podcast, while we got great feedback and a lot of people enjoyed it, was not necessarily going to be a driver of listeners and leads into my business. And that was the missing link. So I went on a journey of exploration. Well, then if I want to use my podcast as a vehicle towards lead generation for my business, what does that look like? How do I do that? And I realized I had no clue how to do that. I did do a lot of research on, podcast resources, things like that. So I did go, I did register for one of your workshops. From that, I began the one-on-one engagement to learn what it would be like to be part of the PodLaunch program. And so that's really where the journey officially began.
I love that. Well, and I remember when you came into the program and you had all these questions about your podcast and exactly to the end that you just shared, because ultimately you had a very clear intention for your podcast. You wanted this to support your business and also elevate your expertise and authority and all those things, but ultimately reach the person that you wanted to reach who could also potentially become a client for you and help shorten that sales cycle and all those things that so many of us start our podcasts for, especially if we have a business in the first place. I'm curious to know, what were some of the challenges coming into the program or sticking points for you that maybe were hard in the moment, but that ultimately led to a great result with your show in terms of the messaging, the branding, the positioning against other podcasts? So were there any moments like that for you?
Taking the journey step by step and breaking it down was really educational and very eye-opening, because you ideally know, hey, this is what I want to do, and this is the client, this is the listener I want to serve. This is where either my skills or my initiative meets the need of somebody out there, and I just don't know who it is and how to find them. So the positioning was super challenging. And for me personally, listening to other students and obviously other podcasters out in the global world of podcasting space, it's fun. It's this great community of people who you put a bottle of wine down and we're going to talk about it. But compared to some of the other podcast topics that are meaty, they're meaningful, they're important, they're life-changing, I struggled to analyze how what I was bringing as far as a podcast topic could even possibly fit into a listener psychographic and pain points and solving problems, because it's wine. And I think that was my biggest struggle going into it, but then breaking it down and really thinking about, like you described, standing in front of a shelf of 1,000 wines and not knowing what you want. Do you just pick the pretty bottle, or do you go with your safe bet that you've had 100 times? And there are struggles, maybe not like life-altering pain points, but there are struggles that my podcast, my message, and listening to what my listener wants and needs as far as information, there is an intersect. And for me, that was the aha moment. I just had to get past that all.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you bring this up, Kristi, because, we've heard that so many times from people who are like, well, I don't have a business podcast, or, I'm not out here like changing lives and things. And I think it's interesting, Kristi, that, this was the sticking point, but became the breakthrough point for you. And so, Kristi, I'm curious, can you give us examples? So the grocery store is one example. What was another example? And I know there were a few that became very, very clear for you. And it was like, then you were off to the races, because then you could really communicate in the language of your listener. What were some of those problems that you identified?
I kept going back to what it felt like before I really started learning about wine myself. And one of those is, I seem to have a network of a lot of wine lovers and a lot of people who are really smart about wine. And I would sit in the room with them or at a wine tasting or go on a trip with them. But I'm feeling overwhelmed because I feel like they are so much further along than me. So as my listener, you will sit there and have that same experience where everyone's talking this different secret society lingo of wine with all the jargon and complexity and pretension that can come along with it. And you're like, I really love this particular wine. I don't know why. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to tell someone what it is that I like about it. Do I not have good taste? Am I just a wine idiot because I like this one and everyone else likes this one? So it's also that follower syndrome of breaking free. You don't have to like what everyone else likes. Love what you love, but learn why so that you can continue to explore in that part of that wine journey.
Yeah. And that right there is such a clear differentiator too for your podcast, because you are speaking to that person who doesn't necessarily need to have a scholarly level knowledge of wine. They just know what they like and they want to understand why they like it. They want to be able to sit there at a restaurant and pick out a wine from the menu that can go with their meal and enjoy it. Period. Done. Like, buy a gift for someone and be able to say, hey, here's a really good wine, that I really enjoy. I hope you enjoy it too. And it doesn't have to necessarily go deeper than that, but also just to underscore that, there are problems that you are solving for people and that those problems may take on different contexts, but this is so true across the board in all podcasts. And we've got to really get clear on what those things are. But also something you said, Kristi, that is really so key is thinking of the you before you now, where it's like, if I'm thinking back to a year ago, 2 years ago, prior to the knowledge that I have now, what were those those problems I was experiencing. And you really, really honed in on that. And I think that the results are very apparent in your podcast, not only the beautiful branding and the titling and the positioning of your show, but also in the results of your relaunch. Can you take us through what that experience was like?
Coming into PodLaunch and not really knowing what a successful launch even looked like. It's like push, upload and you're live is not a really effective launch. And with my original podcast, while I would tell people here and there, oh, hey, I have a podcast, I was not at all comfortable at all promoting, I have this podcast. I had no elevator pitch, no real je ne sais quoi around, hey, I've got a podcast. I think it could help you. I think it could answer those questions for you. Go listen. And so the very, very explicit step-by-step process of getting out, sharing with everyone, enlisting people to support, being overly prepared, meaning don't just launch with one episode, go big, really have a portfolio behind what you're launching. Those were elements that I never even considered prior to PodLaunch. And what was really important about it was, one, for me personally, to get past my own inhibitions around selling my podcast, if you will, promoting this is what I'm doing. I need your help and support to make my launch successful. So one, getting out and doing it, asking that favor, asking for support. And while, of course, you launch big and then you kind of come into a tempo, the data behind that was very important because I know what my targets are. I know where I need to be each week with my episodes, what I need to be tracking to in order to know that the podcast is growing and that we're reaching broader audiences. Now, I still wish some of the stats were a little bit easier to understand. And I know you've been doing some great education for us about what that looks like. But it's not like somebody clicks the box, pays $1, and you go, oh, I got a sale. It's very, very different in Podland.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Kristi, you and me both on the metric side of things. I think you and me and the whole of the podcasting industry on the metric side. I was talking with someone earlier who came from radio, and he was like, podcasting has way more metrics than radio ever did. He said, and yet we still don't fully understand, what we're looking at. And it's so true. And I think this is why so many people default to how many downloads am I getting? And if you've listened to this show for any length of time, you've heard me say the downloads do not tell the full story. Mm-hmm. And Kristi, exactly what you're speaking to here. Yes, you launched really big and you had great results. I mean, you broke the top 100 in the US and Canada in the food category, top 15 in the US in the food category. You ranked in the arts category. I mean, you were ranking all over the place. And it's always so exciting to see those results because it's kind of like proof of concept, right? Like that what I am doing is actually picking up some traction. That's really exciting. And then to your point, it does establish its equilibrium, right? And it will drop down a little bit. And you'll see it peak up and you'll see it drop down. And in those peaks and valleys of growing the podcast, it can be really hard to discern what are these numbers telling me. But like you said, you know exactly what your baselines are. And that is so valuable in and of itself to be able to say, okay, well, I know that if I launched and I ranked at this number in this category with this many downloads, then now it's pretty simple that I just need to figure out a strategy for growing the podcast that is aligned with my bandwidth and my budget and the intent of hitting those numbers, right? In theory, that's what we need to do. In practice, it's a lot harder to do that. I want to acknowledge everyone who's on this journey right now where it's like, yeah, Courtney, you break it down. It sounds so simple. And there's also it's a learning curve. It's definitely a learning curve and you are mastering it and you're continuing to master it. So I'm curious, Kristi, looking ahead for your podcast, what are you most excited about here over the next few months with your show? And looking back, how do you feel about your podcast now compared to the original version of your podcast that you had with your co-host?
As you said, you kind of go through a little bit of an iteration, a little tweak here, a little tweak there, and nothing in podcasting is immediate, but you can start seeing trends. So if you're going to try something new, you have to do it for a period of time to see, does it increase, does it decrease? But what I've learned is just making sure I come as me and my real self to the microphone every single time, whether it's a solo episode or a guest episode, is what is resonating most. I mean, I'll run into someone and they're like, oh my gosh, I love that episode. And I'm like, you listen to my podcast? And they're like, yeah, I love it. And so, you just don't know somebody's listening, and you never know where they're listening, in their car, walking the dogs, etc. So it's not like you're sitting in front of them getting that emotive feedback from facial expressions. So you really have to trust the process. You really have to just keep your focus, keep following the process, and being true to the DNA of the show you're executing to, and don't veer from that. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Stay true to your intended audience. Also ask them for their support, continuous support, share with a friend, follow, like, review. So that engagement process, even though it's a kind of a very oddly amoebic thing in podcasting world, trying to maintain that connection with your listener in order to be relevant and stay relevant is key as well.
You touched on something really important, Kristi, about being true to you and being true to the DNA of your show. And I want to highlight this here because at the end of the day, every show is going to grow to varying degrees. Every show is going to grow at varying speeds. Some shows are going to grow and some shows are not going to grow. Some shows are not intended to grow because it's a niche podcast and it's not a general interest podcast. So to remember, first and foremost, there's no apples to apples comparisons in podcasting. And when we can take that emotion and that ego out of the process of growth and instead put the focus on exactly what you just said, which is how can I bring my full self to the mic every single time I show up for the people I'm creating this show for, and just stay focused on that. The journey, no matter how long it takes you, is going to be a lot more rewarding when you know that you're proud of what you're creating and that that's all that really matters at the end of the day. Because for many of us, we have niche podcasts. So we're not going to have these huge, massive numbers that, Joe Rogan and Mel Robbins and all these kind of people might have. And that's okay because you don't need that in order to be successful and to really get clear on what you define as success for your podcast. And I'm curious, Kristi, looking ahead with your podcast, what's a goal that you have set for your show right now here over the next 90 days or so that you're really working toward? And what specifically are you doing in order to achieve that?
Now that we are 4 or 5 months post launch, I have enough data and enough kind of trends to understand what's resonating well with my listeners. So my goal is to take what I've learned, what's gone well and has been well received from audience feedback, and I'm taking that as kind of the listen through ratios, things like that, and being a little bit more exacting in the development of the shows themselves. Because, for example, my average episode that's solo is maybe 20 to 24 minutes. However, when I have a guest on, they've been in the 40 to 50 minutes. And so trying to get everything back, with a target of 20 minutes solo, 30 minutes guest. And I know that's still a 10-minute differential, which is a lot in the listening world. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 30% longer. So that's one goal, is just to figure out really how to be more exacting in delivering. So my listeners know I've got a 20-minute drive. Boom. Kristi's got me. She's going to keep me entertained from garage to garage, right? So that is one. And then just the overall process. It's not just recording and throwing an episode out there. How can I build more strength in the systems so that I'm spending more time creating valuable content and less time on the administrative side of things, because it can be overwhelming. And we all know that. And I'm a team of one. Yay me. So that's another goal, is to start parsing some of that out. But you have to put the system in place before you can get support in executing the system. And knowing what I like and what I don't like and leveraging the tools that I found, that's another thing I'll continue to do. And of course, growth, audience growth, and learning new ways to find and attract new listeners, whether that's through SEO or me just out in the community engaging with more people, being bold enough to go say, hey, you just said you have trouble with this. I have an episode. Go listen to it.
You're being so deliberate in how you're approaching your show, Kristi. And this is just so telling of the experience that you've been through, the way you're thinking about your podcast now compared to maybe the way you'd been thinking about your previous podcast, and just the way in which you're approaching it. You're taking it so seriously. And I mean, you're on the right track for sure. You're doing all the right things. I'm curious, for someone listening today, based on our conversation here, maybe they're sitting in a similar place as you were initially. What advice would you leave them with?
I'm going to go back to where I was sitting, 6-7 months ago. And if you are serious about launching a successful podcast, please do not assume you know what you need to know in order to do that, because you can still go through the motions and do it. But if you really want to serve your audience in a way that is really with them in mind versus the rest of the universe in mind, learning. I mean, it's kind of like I'm a golfer. So I've taken enough lessons in my lifetime to know if you want to improve your chipping skills, you either get somebody's coaching help and then you practice. So for me with podcasting, yes, I had done it before and had moderate success, not great success, but didn't feel like I had a structure, vision, or knowledge on how to take it next level. Get into a mindset of learning before launching. And whether that's joining an organization like PodLaunch and getting professional resources, to me, that is number one, because there's just so much you don't know. It's a constant learning journey. But if you don't take that initiative to learn it as a separate skill, that's something new and you've never done before, the path to success is going to be a lot longer if you, even after the average 6 episodes, are still recording new episodes. So be humble and go seek the help you need to be successful.
I feel like I'm saying this all the time till I'm blue in the face, right? But it is a learning curve, and that's normal. I think what we don't often give ourselves the grace of understanding is that it's to be expected, that we expect ourselves to have it all figured out. Or, for a lot of us, we're entrepreneurs. We do the thing. We show up. We get it done. We roll up the sleeves. We do the work. We're not afraid of it. And yet, to your point, that you don't know what you don't know. And if you could know it, and that could accelerate the process for you or help you save time in the figuring out of the process to help you get the result you're looking for faster, then taking that little bit of time to slow down, to go fast, will pay off ultimately in the long run. And Kristi, you are proof of that. So thank you for being here to share your story with us today. I'm so excited for you, for your podcast, and for everything that's to come with your show.
Been a fun ride, and I still feel like I'm on the upward trajectory of the first hill of the roller coaster.
You are, and then it's going to dip, and then it's going to go back up, and then it's going to eventually level out a little bit. I promise you that you're on the right path. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep taking your show seriously, which I know you are, and keep being deliberate in how you're approaching it. And I promise you, you're going to see that pay off.
Thanks so much.
And if you've ever struggled to identify the exact problems that your podcast solves, or if you want help to identify them, or if you think you've identified them, but you want to get a second opinion on it from a team who has literally been the driving force behind more than 70 Bingeworthy podcast launches and relaunches, then scroll down, book a call, and let's find out if PodLaunch is the right fit to get you there. And in the meantime, stay right where you are, because knowing the problems that your podcast solves is one thing. But inevitably, the next question that comes up at this point is, well, will that box me into only talking about these topics on my show forever and ever? And the short answer is no. There is nuance to it. And in the next episode, I'm answering a listener question about how do you strike a balance between these hot topic episodes that you know your audience is interested in and that might be really good for SEO with the topics that you are genuinely interested in and that you want to cover on your show. And I'm going to show you how to create the perfect mix between your thought leadership content and the topics that you know your audience wants to hear about, so that when you show up to the mic, you can create episodes that you're excited to record and that your listeners can't get enough of. All that's coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.